I had ruined my teenage years by getting a girl pregnant and my whole life by getting married. Now, my wife and baby were gone, and I had absolutely nothing to show for my life except for a bad case of life. Paralyzed Emotion by Rodney D. Roby. Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodreads, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me. Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and to the review of Paralyzed Emotion by Rodney D. Roby. I love this book because it's another autobiography novel that I'm reading and reviewing on this channel. And I love autobiographies, especially when it has to do with the theme of mental health. I love real life stories and I love stories that are able to pull me in. I love emotional story, and that's what happened to me. I was quite intrigued when I read through Paralyzed Emotion by Rodney D. Roby. First of all, I love to say thank you to Amanda, who is actually the assistant of the author, Rodney D. Roby, for sending a copy. There's a kind of a letter from her. I don't know if that will be visible to the viewer from here, so I'm gonna read that out to you. It was inscribed, it was sent alongside with the card and some other things, the business card of the author and some other things, and the letter. The letter read, Dear Peter, thank you for your personal interest in Rodney's book. You are the first reviewer that we have sent to. May this book be helpful to you and powerfully received. God's blessing to you, friend. Thank you very much, Amanda. I really appreciate that. So before I talk about this book, I'd love to read to you the synopsis that was inscribed at the back page of the book. When I was first diagnosed with a mental illness, I sought after information that could tell me just what in the world was happening to me. There was nothing, or at least I didn't find anything. I wrote these letters to my first psychiatrist so she could see inside my head, to see all the fears, confusions, hurt, and multitude of thoughts that wounded me. When I read these letters to my wife, I actually cried. I completed this book with a prayer that it will help people who suffer to understand what they are going through and see that there is hope. Also, so people can understand what their loved ones is going through. Prayerfully, this book will help doctors and counselors. This is very powerful. Not only will you see all the illness, but a lot of hope and healing. That's the synopsis from the author. I love autobiographies. I don't know why I love autobiographies, but I love reading real life stories because, it's under the genre of non-fiction. And I love, autobiographies coupled with historical event. And that reminded me of some sort of autobiography novels that I've read so far on this channel that has to do with the theme of mental health. And I was really fascinated when I read through Paralyzed Emotion by Rodney D. Roby. It is very emotional, it is empathetic, it pulls me in. And at a point, I deliberate if I should cry or not. Because, mental health issues are always full of gruesome life issues. And for you to have an author who has suffered from mental health to write down something about their own life, it is actually characterized with emotion. It is characterized with deep thought. It is characterized with some sort of bad, ugly circumstances that surround their life. And I specifically had to, say a very good accolade to Rodney D. Roby for revealing the most, hidden part of his life. He wrote something, in my own perception, he wrote something that some authors would be scared of writing. He was very transparent about his life story, and he wrote it with the hope so that people who suffer from this sort of mental health issue can also find, hope and encouragement in it. And I was really fascinated with Rodney's book. Okay, before I talk about this book, my review of this book is actually gonna be a spoiler free because I don't want to spoil it. And I'm so excited talking about it because I feel it is so gruesome. It is so heart wrenching. It is very touching. It is very touching. So I'd love to read to you the about the author before I move into my short video book review, recommendation video book review of Rodney's book. About the author. Born in a small Texas panhandle town in 1962, Rodney started school in the Ozark Mountains of Missouri, but moved back to Texas just a few months later. There he lived, struggling with his own emotion and loneliness. Yes, he had his mom and dad and sister, but he starved for attention and love. Love that only the gay could give. Someone to share life with, to bond into one, like the Bible speaks of. In its desperation for love, Rodney married at only 16 years of age. It was not what he craved so bad, but it was bad and only lasted for a very long and torturous year and a half. In 1980, Rodney moved to Wyoming to again live with his mom and dad and get a divorce. His now were short. He was an emotional wreck. Rodney shook so violently that he was not able to control his body. It was so cold that in the heat of July and August, Rodney, while wearing thermal underwear and coat, would sit in the hot car with all the windows rolled up until it could finally get warm. Somewhere in the summer of 1984, he couldn't take the stress from life and emotion of loneliness any longer and suffered from a horrible breakdown. Rodney was put in the hospital and doped up big time. For the next 10 plus years, he was drugged up with so much medicine. There was no emotion to have. One of the medicine was known as the chemical lobotomy. Like a zombie, Rodney struggled to have any reason or purpose to live. I repeat that again. Like a zombie, Rodney struggled to have any reason or purpose to live. I think Mary Dean thinks about the author, one should be able to have a glimpse that the book is actually a ride to the struggle that Rodney had with its mental illness. The story of Rodney actually started way back when he was a child, and it started from its primary education all through to his secondary education. And while I read through the early years of Rodney, it was a little bit somehow smooth at some instance, though he has some family issue attached in some point, and it was very intriguing and fascinating. Rodney sometimes struggled to express his emotion whenever he finds someone that he loves. I read a part whereby he found it very difficult to even speak to a lady until someone helped him out and was able to, find love in some guys around. And the story of Rodney actually, or let me say, the journey to his mental illness actually started at the age of 16 when he went to impregnate the 14 years old May. The impregnation of May led him to marrying her, and they had no choice than to come together and live together, even at that very young age. At this point, Rodney was already feeling, bad about himself. He often expressed himself like a sinner and sometimes pray to God and plead to God for forgiveness of sin. And one of those traits is actually reflected in one of the poems that he wrote at this point, which I thought reciting it, but I want to keep this review is spoiler free, so I don't want to talk too much about that. So when Rodney finally married the 14 years old May, most people are not really incoherent with them. Most people are not really in supportive of the marriage. Joined together and they started to live together. Rodney was just 16 years of age at this time, and it was going to fix the reality of being a father, coupled with a 40 years old me who did not mostly know anything about parenting. The scenario of Rodney's marriage is quite unbelievable. At some point, I wonder how they were able to cope together even for the period of a year and a half, because I find it quite very, very, so fast and very young. Because one of the things that Rodney expounded in his book was when May finally gave birth to a baby, to a baby, and she doesn't even know much of the characteristics of being a mother, because in my own perception May is just a 14 years old girl who should still be under experienced tutelage, but because of the pregnancy she became a sudden mother, and she hardly had most of the experience, she hardly had most of the training that she ought to have before she can become a mother. One of the most very silly, annoying, and very sort of cases that kept me enthralled in the book was a part whereby when she gave birth to the baby, she hardly changed the bed of the child, and whenever the baby pee, the urine will soak in the bed, and what she would do is to add some other blanket and add it to the point whereby Rodney discovered something is smelling in the room, and it was able to shake and discover that it's the baby's bed that stick this bad. According to the book, the smell is very awkward. I really don't know how May was able to put up with that. Apart from that, May is actually someone who hardly does ask job. Rodney is the one mostly doing it, even when he goes to work, because at this point, the marital life of Rodney at this early age was full of struggle, was full of some other sort of issue, because he had to work to pay the house rent. They actually live in a one-room apartment together with his wife, and he had to work so that he can feed his wife, and he had to work also so that he can take care of the baby and himself. And at this point, I read a particular place where the author wrote that he had a particular pair of shoe, or except someone was able to dact him one, and he do change his clothes, because a particular time he worked in a particular organization. Whenever he arrived from work, he would go straight into the bedroom and bathe himself together with the clothes, rub the soap, hang it overnight, and when it's morning, he pick it up again and started work. When all this was going on, May was less concerned. She always go to visit her mother and discussed most of what is happening in the house with her. And because of this, the family member of May actually have some sort of perception towards Rodney, and Rodney was very, very afraid so that May would not leave him. And I think that's one of the reasons why he was so desperate and very serious about the marriage, that he tried his possible best to keep it going with his hard work. The story kept unfolding, and the scenario about Rodney's marriage was very gruesome at some point. At some point, I felt empathetic for him, and at some point, I felt that the marriage was not supposed to come at this early age, because they haven't really get a lot of things in place. The story of Rodney keep moving on to the point whereby sometimes he would be sacked from work, sometimes he lost his job because of his wife, and sometimes his neighbor would come into the room, the one-room apartment, which is actually a guy, would come and visit his wife, stay all through from the morning till evening. Whenever he comes back from work, he will also meet him in the same bed, and Rodney feels so concerned about this. And I think one of the way with which I would describe May to me is that May is someone who is nonchalant. I think in my own perception, she needs some sort of training, because even the old thing generally, it's something that they are very, very young for marriage issue. It gets to the point whereby May eventually left Rodney and left with a child, and here it created sort of trauma on Rodney, as he struggled both day and night to meet, even at once to speak with his son, and it was very, very difficult for him. The story of Rodney's, mental illness started when May left him. The scenario or the trauma that divorced had on him was quite very, very gruesome, quite emotional. And the case whereby she left with a son and he hardly have the time to speak with him, coupled with the fact whereby he hardly gets some job, and this sort of result in some sort of emotional malady on him, and sometimes he would start behaving weirdly. And the sudden mental illness came swiftly, because at some point he would be taken to the therapist, and sometimes he will visit some medical doctors and they will give him some drug to calm him down. That was when he had a bad case of nerve, and this scenario kept occurring. And Rodney at a point becomes so addicted with TV. After the wife had left, he had to relocate back to his parents' house to live together with them. At some point, when he get a job again, which pays him $1,000 thereabout in monthly, he relocated again and get some things done. And eventually, again, I think something happened. He fell sick, and because of the long time that the sickness took, his boss had to wrote to him that they don't need the service anymore. So the scenario whereby Rodney lost his job, lose connection with his wife and children, and even he couldn't even go further his education because of this sort of issue that he had. At the point it became very, very serious that Rodney was started hearing strange voices. And one of the things I've actually seen so popular or common among people that suffer from mental health issue is the fact that they do hear strange voices speaking to them, telling them to do something that is bad. The scenario whereby Rodney here would hear some strange voices telling him to hurt himself and hurt anybody around him. He kept hearing this voice, and sometimes he would say, "Oh no, I don't want to do this," but the voice would press him down. This scenario actually occurred that sometimes Rodney will intentionally hurt himself, and it's now becoming very rampant and is becoming very addicted to it. And at this point, I seem to express the realization or the reality of those voices to the presence of an evil spirit. I don't know, but I think it's a sort of a rampant issue with most people that suffer from mental health. Because when I read through Rodney's experience with strange voices, it reminded me of Shana Barker's fearless concrete of mental bugatti. Because at some point, why Shana Barker suffered from agoraphobia, panic attack, and depression, all those sort of mental health issue, she also hear voices telling her to kill herself and her mother. And also, it reminded me of Jennifer McDonald, schizoaffective disorder. These are also, all of them are autobiography. McDonald also wrote about how she would hear some strange voices and she termed it as an hallucination. But in Paralyzed Emotion, the strange voices that Rodney hear, it's somewhat different from the ones I read in Shanna Barker's book as well as Jennifer McDonald. It's somewhat very gruesome here, and Rodney wrote that he could feel the presence of the devil in his house. He could feel the presence of the devil in his room, and sometimes he would pray. In the past life of Rodney, in the early part of the novel, he was a very devoted Christian. He almost pray every time, study the word of God at all time, but along the line he backslided and forgot all of that, and something else came in. But towards the end of the book, he seems to rededicate his life back to Christ, and he was able to pray against such kind of health issue, demons appearing to him in his room, and the case of him feeling the presence of a demon begin to subside. The story of Rodney is very gruesome, it is empathetic, it is emotional, and it's very, very intriguing. And one of the things I find quite important and very impressive about this book is that there are some points that the author wrote the most transparent aspect of his life. I don't want to talk about this part. It was very transparent. He was open-minded. I love his sincerity. I love the way he wrote everything about his life without, some people might have some sort of notion. In my opinion, I think he voiced and wrote something that some people can find very difficult to expound. I love his transparency, and that's one of the reasons why I gave this book a 5 over 5 star. It's one of the best sort of autobiography that I've read so far, and I really enjoyed my time while I read through it. So Rodney was put on medication. Sometimes it take below medication, and sometimes it take the actual medication. So that's how the struggle with mental health issue went all through. The scar that a broken home left on Rodney is very emotional. It is, so wrenching, and it is heartbreaking. And at the point, I felt for him because I know that it is actually not an easy thing. Honestly, the book kept me enthralled until I finished indulging in my relatable emotions in it. It is something that I would recommend for anyone who suffers from mental illness. If you know anyone who suffers from mental health issue, who suffers from any sort of mental health condition, I recommend you getting Paralyzed Emotion by Rodney D. Roby. It is also good for medical doctors and therapists. I think they would find some sort of information that would help them to treat their patient. Rodney's story comes so raw. It comes in an empathetic manner. The tone of the narrator is quite distinctive. Yes, that reminds me. Another thing that I quite enjoyed while I read through this book is the writing style. The writing style is quite distinctive. It is absolutely fascinating, and at some point I could resonate with it because the book is actually told based on the pronoun I, and I think that's what most autobiography are being told because it's a personal life issue, it's a personal life story, and it's been told in the pronoun I, and that itself added more charm to the book. Honestly, this book is so amazing. I cannot describe it enough. I don't want to talk about everything in entirety. I plan to keep my review spoiler free, and would love to recommend this book to lovers of autobiography, to those people that suffer from mental illness, and to medical doctors, therapists, psychologists, and to humans generally. Rodney's story is very interesting. It's absolutely enthralling. It is fascinating. It is very wholesome, and it is very transparent. Honestly, I don't want to talk too much about this book. I don't want to talk about everything in entirety, as I plan to keep the review spoiler free, and I strongly recommend this book to everyone. So, if you watch this video to this point and you're yet to click on the subscribe button, I want to urge you to please click on the subscribe button over there. Also consider liking this video and sharing it with your friends. Turn on the notification bell if you've not done that so you can get notified anytime I release new videos. Thank you very much for watching my video book review of Rodney D. Roby, Paralyzed Emotion. It is very great. I love it as much as I love autobiography. I love it as much as I love reading real life stories. I love it as much as I love reading autobiography, most especially in the theme of mental illness. Thank you very much. See you in my next video.